afternoon, everyone. So right now we're going to have a talk from Ymir Vigfusson from Emory University. Give him a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you. Great meeting all of you. Hola. So I wanted to talk about hacking. And specifically, I wanted to talk about how we hack, who hacks, why do we hack, and what can we do about it. Okay? So first, just a show of hands. So how many people have actually hacked something or someone here? Anyone care to admit this? One little gentle hand. Oh, a few hands, okay. Yes, good. How many people would like to know how to hack? 5 people, really? Great, okay, I talk. Cool, so let's get to it. Let me just give a little overview here. I'm just going to start out with these questions. This how, why, who, and then we're going to move over to what can we do about it and how can we learn more about hacking. So they say that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And I want to kind of get to the edge of that particular proposition. So when I talk about hacking, what I mean is doing something to a program or a thing that it was not intended to do. That's what hacking is at its core. So with this definition, that could be something like guessing a person's password. That means that you have, you've effectively defeated an authentication mechanism. You can now assume that person's privileges. It can also be more commonly to exploit faulty logic. Something that was not intended by a program. You're not getting around, getting into it. But most importantly, and this is what I really want you to take away today, is that it's a mindset. There's a particular way of thinking about things when you're a hacker. It's effectively taking an item and saying, okay, how do I break this? How do I get around defenses? Or what if the programmer, what if the designer hadn't accounted for all the different things? How can you get around it? That's the hacker mindset. So we're going to get to this now throughout this talk. So let me get back to this magic thing. I'm just going to tell you a story. So when I was growing up, like computers had this magical allure, right? There were this thing that you could just open up, and it was a portal into this very logical universe that could endow you with endless ways of solving problems, and you could do pretty much anything. It was this amazing thing, just like a little telescope in your bedroom. And then when I was 12, I got the internet, and that was the last I saw of my physical friends, right? The only way I could get a tan was like dial up the monitor, right? I wouldn't go outside the sunshine. I would just be in my computer online. And the internet at the time, this is in '96, was very different than we're used to, right? Have you seen websites from '96? It's like animated rainbows and mailboxes that keep opening. No? No, anybody? Oh, okay. We made some really crappy websites, but there was so much more actually to the internet at the time. So the web was just a small thing. We had, of course, email and stuff, but we had something called Internet Relay Chat, IRC. Anybody familiar with this? Am I too old? Yeah. It's the precursor of AOL Messenger, which is the precursor of MSN Messenger, which is the precursor to Facebook Messenger and Snapchat and these things. So it's like a few generations ago. And at that time, you didn't add friends to a list or anything like that. You just joined a channel online. And anybody in the world could join that channel and chat. And at the time, the people who had the internet were the people who were really interested in technology. So it was a really egalitarian environment. So of course, you would be drawn into an environment where there were people like-minded who wanted to tinker with technology, right? So these were the people who were taking things apart, trying to understand how to put them back together, the limits of technology, right? So there were some of the internet's first hackers. These are the people that were discovering how technology, as it was just coming about, as the internet was just growing, how many weaknesses there were in software and how you could actually exploit them. And they were motivated not by malice, but just by curiosity. So, as it would happen, when you have a whole bunch of socially repressed teenage boys living in their parents' basements eating pizza, you would have groups forming in these IRC channels. You would have these hacker groups, these collectives together. And those collectives would have rivalry, of course, right? So what happens in a hacker rivalry? Can you imagine? Yeah? Yes, that's right. People get hacked, right? So what would be happening was that we would hack other hacking groups. So we would just break into their accounts. We would effectively what's called own them at the time, what's called pwn. It means that you effectively break into a person's computer to the extent that you assume all of their credentials, you read their emails, you know everything about the person, you get all their stuff. That's what owning is about. And it was completely normal at this time. So in other words, you had these hacking groups, and we're just going back and forth in this kind of war online, very discreetly going in, stealing other stuff. So I was in a hacker group whose goal it was, or manifesto was, to hack other hacking groups. So we had all the stuff. We had a lot of power there. And it was pretty amazing how justified we felt in doing this. So because there was a code, there was a social conformity to the group of saying like, yeah, obviously it's okay for me to like completely hack this guy, even if he's my friend, right? Because I want his stuff and I read his email. We created programs to decrypt people's private communications. They had their own encryption, so forth. It was pretty wacky. It was only later that you looked at it in hindsight and realized that, yeah, that's not okay. That's pretty creepy. Right? So I remember a particular night that I wanted to talk about. Anybody recognize this image here? It's from a movie called Matrix 2, which is maybe predates you. This is actually just a little snapshot that shows an exploit. It's just an exploit called SSH CRC32. This was an amazing exploit. I remember when this came out. So I was in the hacker groups that had like kind of one of our friends made this. Was this friend stood who was just there and said, I've created an exploit that can get in anywhere. I can hack Secure Shell. Secure Shell was something that was running everywhere. Every single system administrator in the world was running Secure Shell to get remote access to their network. And this was an exploit that allows anybody who had an exploit to just walk into it. It was the key to any door on the internet. And I remember thinking three things that night. The first thing was like, wow, there's no challenge anymore. I can just use this exploit and I can do whatever I can change anything. Anything that has a digital representation I can affect. I can move into any company, I could change people's accounts. I could do whatever I wanted, right? And the challenge was just gone because you're always working towards getting more and more tools. And this was just the ultimate hacker tool, right? And you're like, whoa. And then the next thought I had was, wow, this is a lot of power, right? Anybody who's bullied me, I can just erase them. Oh, I could get back at that guy who stole the girl I had that I had some feelings for, or I could go and take on bad corporations in the world. I could like inflict my social code on the world. I could become Mr. Robot, right? I could just do whatever. I was like, whoa, this is so much power. And then it really hit me. This is probably more power than I know what to do with, right? This is the only way this can end is badly, right? So I started thinking like, well, what do I do? This is an opportunity still. It's a means for me to actually change the world. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Do you seize that or let it go? And the third thing that I thought that night was like, wow, it's 5 a.m., school starts in 2 hours. Right? I'm in high school, I'm 16. I have all this power at my doorstep, and like, I'm a high schooler. How on earth did that happen, right? That's an amazing concentration of power. And you can just imagine how much moral code a 16-year-old has, right? Yes? So I had the dilemma. And the dilemma was really, do I take this opportunity all the way? Do I become a vigilante, for instance? I could take on criminals. I could try to do it for my own moral, ethical code, right? I could go and bust some criminal gangs or try to correct some wrongs in the world and so forth based on my vantage point and my perspective, right? Why not, right? How often do you get that chance? So faced with this dilemma of incredible power, of course with high risk, but incredible power versus nothing, letting it go, quitting. What do you choose? What would you choose? And I thought about this, and like, this is how we felt at the time, right? Something like this, like, whoa, right? And as I started thinking about this power element, I was like, this is a really complicated game of chess. I think it's probably going to end something like this, right? You're chasing this kind of one ring to rule them all, right? And you're probably not going to fare so well, right? Right? We've read about it many times, how this fares. I don't think concentration of power ever is a good idea. So faced with this choice, I decided to walk away from the whole thing. I said, okay, I'm quitting. I stopped hacking at that moment. This was something where I was just like, this is too dangerous for me. I don't see how this is going to end in any positive way, right? Even if you had like a short amount of time. And I actually followed through as some of my friends made the opposite choice, right? They were there and they were seizing this opportunity. And they, for a short time, were kings, right? They could do whatever they wanted. They had infinite money, all these things, right? And I also watched as they lost all that power. So they were chasing this corrosive spiral of power and wealth, and they wound up with neither. It was a mirage, right? And they sunk all the way to the depths. Prison, some of them didn't even make it out alive. This was the end for some of my friends. There are others who took a similar stance and kind of walked away from this kind of power. And they actually are running some of the world's biggest organizations. They are the security guys at all the top tech companies and so forth. They did really well for themselves. But it was very important to be able to modulate this level of power. And then later, so I moved away from hacking, and I still yearned for challenge. I think my fate had already been sealed at that point. Really what I was doing when I was hacking was that I was understanding the computer. I was understanding how to kind of break things from the vantage point of being able to solve problems, right? It was problem solving, really, for me. So I started doing mathematics at the university. I went to the US. I did a Ph.D. in computer science, completely different field, distributed systems. But I always had this kind of feeling that, wait a minute, I have all this knowledge that I've accrued, and I have a lot to answer for from my hacking days, many exploits. And there was some guilt that kind of rid me. I was like, what can I do to make things better? And I realized that really what it is not a technological problem, right? It's easy to think about security problems of the world, which we're hearing so much about, right? That's why many of you are here, right? We're hearing about hacking all the time. Every company gets hacked. It's easy to think that there's some technological solution that's just going to get rid of it. But there are really smart people working on security. If there was a solution, I think we would already have found it. The problem is more profound. The problem is not technological. It is something else. What I think it was is really a lack of awareness and a lack of education. People don't understand security. So we're going to get to that a little later in the talk. But this is why I'm teaching this hacker mindset. I think it's very important for people to be able to understand their adversary, understand this opponent, understand the mindset that makes people break stuff. Because ultimately, this idea of security is fundamentally hard. If you're a defender, you need to understand every possible way somebody might try to get into your network or to your computer, right? And in order to be able to do that, you need to be able to visualize what those ways are. If you can't, you're not a good defender, right? You're proving a negative, in a sense, right? So what I started doing was to devise university courses. So I've taught, 12 courses on hacking for people. What I learned very early on was that if you teach a course about security, people are like, oh, security, oh, and they ditch your class and all that stuff. Right? Like, oh, I have to learn this stuff. If you teach a course about hacking, they're like, where can I sign up? I want to go right now. I want to learn it. Like, I want to learn it all. Where's the book? Is there a book? I want the book, right? Everybody's super eager about learning hacking, right? I've never seen people pick up assembly so quickly. Like people who were like struggling in classes, they spent 24 hours reading a book about compilers. What? Nobody does that, right? But it was just because it was prerequisite for the hacking aspects of it, right? So if you teach hacking, you're really teaching a lot of the fun stuff, but you're also teaching the fundamentals of how to think about and how to approach security problems. What are the things that break, right? Instead of teaching you, here's a bunch of solutions that are current, I'm teaching you how to swim in that world, right? And that you can be in your company or wherever and you think about security, be like, this is probably a bad idea, guys, right? Yeah, we have really good firewalls, but like our backdoor is always open, right? Because we get food, right? Something akin to that in the digital sphere. You would think about how your adversary would try to navigate inside. I did competitions, so I had started like annual competitions where we had people actually live on stage hacking each other. It was really fun. Scoreboard and whatnot, similar to like the CTF stuff that we just heard about. And it became so popular that we actually moved it online. And so the last iteration of it was called ICTF, had 3,400 participants from 180 countries, right? It's really fun. It's like a lot of young people learning about security and exploits in a really safe environment. It's a really fun way of doing it. And I also started a couple of companies. So first one called Syndis, where we have all my old hackers in a company, in a security company now, where we do penetration testing. So we simulate sophisticated cyber attacks against gigantic international companies. So they will call us up and be like, hey, can you hack us? And so we say like, yeah, yes. And they're like, all right, how long? 2 weeks. Okay, here's money, right? And then you just sit there and you're allowed to hack the company, and it's fun, and you get paid for it. It's great, right? That's penetration testing for you. And I mean, there's some fun stories from that. For instance, there was a financial company. Oh, I'm talking about a gigantic financial company. And you would think that a financial company would be one of the safest places, right? So this particular one was like, yeah, we think we're pretty safe, and we'd like to get a penetration test. Yeah? How long do you think you'll take? Like 3 weeks. Okay. And then after 10 days, we give them a call, like, I don't know how to tell you this, but we even hacked your printers. There's nothing left to hack in your company. And there was this silence on the line. It's like, so they decided to change some things, and then came later. And then we also started a company called Adversary, which is about actually training people, regular developers, regular people, in these craft. It's like a website where you can learn stuff. I'll show you in a little bit. Anyway. Here's the next question I wanted to go through. It's like, how do you hack, right? This is always this mystical question for people, right? And it's really, when you go into it, you realize that it's really not that hard. So let's just take some examples. Here's an online bank. And this is an example. It's a codified example. And I'm putting it up here because it's real. So this is an example of a routine written in some sort of pseudo, either Java or C code, for transferring money between accounts. You have an account, and I want to transfer money to, I don't know, Sophia over here, right? So I put in like the amount, and what this code does is to check like, oh, does Ymir have enough money to transfer? Because it would be stupid if I could just transfer $1 gazillion if I don't have them, right? So there's a check, and it even has an error code that says, well, insufficient funds, okay. And then you do the transfer, right? If you were a coder, you looked at this, you'd be like, ha, yes, I caught something there. Can you think about how to defeat this code? What if you transfer a negative amount to Sophia? What happens to poor Sophia? You're effectively taking money from her. There's no check for that, is there? That is the hacker mindset. Thinking about things that could go wrong, thinking about the limits, pushing the edges, right? That's what we do when we're doing code review and penetration tests, is to think about, well, what if, right? This is a signed number. You could have a negative value. This actually happened. There was like one of my colleagues in the company at the time, he was just doing a penetration. He's like, hey, hey, look at your account, man. I was like, what? No, look at it. Yes? Look at it again. So he was just playing around with a penetration test against a bank in Iceland that had this flaw. Great stuff. This happens all the time. It's insane, okay? Or we can do something even simpler. This is something that happens now all the time. I'm sure all of you get this email. You're like, oh, I don't remember doing a password reset, but I don't remember my password all the time. In fact, I rarely remember my password, so I'm keep doing password resets. And so I have to enter my password on Twitter. So you enter your password on Twitter, but then you realize it's not actually Twitter, it's Twitler. And you're like, oh no, you're like, ah. So you realize that you've just handed somebody your credentials and they're logging on and doing stuff. This happens all the time. It's a part of the phishing expeditions. So I know there are many examples to this. For instance, if you just happen to be at a Citibank customer and you get that email, you may simply know that there's something, oh, okay, there's a message for me. And you go in there and something looks exactly like Citibank and you log on. People fall for this stuff, right? Or this UPS parcel notification that has a zip file as an attachment that's really an executable and installs malware in your computer. And you realize later, like, oh man, I've made a huge mistake, right? How often does this happen? Well, let's just take some numbers from Canada. So every single day in Canada, this is a number from a couple of years ago, 156 million phishing emails are sent out, of which only 10% make it through the filters. We have really good filters. But of these 16 millions that made it through, half of them are opened. We're so trained that things go into the spam folder when they're spam, that things that pop up in our mailbox are opened at least. And of these, 10%, 800,000, have their links clicked. 800,000 a day, right? It's practically free to send this stuff out. Of these, 10% send private information. 80,000 a day. This is a lot of money. Like, this has black market value, identity stuff, right? So that's just the reality of it. Now, probably more interestingly, how would you do something like break into a particular company? And that's something called spear phishing, where you like have a particular target in mind. And that's when it's really hard. So normally what happens if you have a company is that there's something there that you want to protect. You have some treasure here. This is your code, or it's maybe your database of credit card numbers. Maybe it's your code base itself. It's something you want to protect. So of course, you install all the latest firewalls and all that stuff. And you have like every protection under the sun, right? You just go there and you make sure that nobody can get inside this perimeter of yours, right? And so along comes a hacker, right? And this hacker, well, it's probably going to be hard for this person just to kind of penetrate directly through the outer network. This is kind of how hacking worked in 2000. It doesn't anymore. Because what hackers have realized is that the things that are worth protecting are usually in big enough organizations that all have people working there. And these people need to be able to do their job. They need to be able to, I don't know, read email or surf the net or do stuff, right? They have to somehow be able to reach out. And as they reach out, that's where we strike, right? So let's take email as an example, as a high-level example, right? So what you do is that you simply just craft a particular email for some person that you found on Facebook. You found that they use an Apple laptop because there's a picture of an Apple laptop on their open Facebook page. We do this all the time. And you realize, okay, so I can send this kind of malware to that person. Apple is our favorite because everybody thinks Apple is secure, so nobody updates anything, so you can always hack them right away. And you would just send like a message with malware that attacks the particular computer. So now we have a foothold inside the perimeter. This part is the simplest part of getting into a company now. Now the hard stuff starts, is to figure out where stuff is. Fortunately for hackers, and unfortunately for everybody else, once you're inside the inner perimeter, everything is open, right? You can walk to any computer, you can hack them. Now you just like go ahead and you hack the Jira or whatever, and then you hack the system administrator ultimately, and you just have your little tunnel. You're never walking through this perimeter, you're just going through this tunnel that you already have created. Once you have the system administrator, you have all the keys that you need. You go into the production server, and you just shuttle out the stuff that you want, and nobody is the wiser. The only hacks you hear about are the ones where something fails. That's a very small percentage for good hackers. Most of the times, companies have no idea what hit them or that they were even hit. Right? When they do realize it, they give us a call sobbing like, we were hacked, we don't know if they're still inside, we don't know what they took. And it's terrible. And that's because they spend 97% of their money on this perimeter here that's completely useless. Don't drop it, but it doesn't do all the things that you think it does, right? So that's how you hack a particular company. So let me just show you how that might play out in practice. We had a journalist that showed up and was like, hey, can you hack us? Sure. Live? Okay. On camera? Okay. So they produced the following video. My name is Ymir Vigfusson. I'm an assistant professor of computer science at Reykjavik University in Iceland. So I'm just preparing an email, something that looks believable, but is still something that contains something that people would find fascinating and click maybe in it.
The email I received seemed innocent enough. It was friendly, it addressed me personally. I clicked the link, opens up a page that is his, personal website, and there's a PDF link at the bottom that's his resume.
But actually when you open it, it does more than just open up. It's actually gonna run a program on the computer that the user doesn't know about.
So it looks like this is his resume here.
Okay, now we're in here, okay. Excellent. We got a connection here from this person's computer. Elizabeth is now logged on. But what I have here is actual remote access to her computer. So I can see all her files. I can do a bunch of stuff. Let's be a little mean and scare her a little bit. So let's try this.
Shall we play a game?
Looks like my computer is talking to me.
Let's take a picture of her. Just a little snap, a little flash. You usually don't notice it when it's just one picture being taken by your webcam.
Oh, God. It's scary because it feels like someone's looking at my screen somewhere else, or looking at me, which is probably the scariest part. They know what I'm doing.
Actually, I'm also going to get a copy of it here, so let's see if that works out. This is her, I guess. So now we can see who the target is. Finding some older photos now. And let's see what's happening. So here's some photo of her with someone. And then we can just keep browsing through as much as we like.
That's my boyfriend and I on New Year's. So this is getting really creepy. These are like personal photos. Yeah, I'm not too happy with this.
It turns out that the weakest link is always the human. And so we're kind of shooting fish in a barrel. Doesn't mean that it necessarily works, but this is how large organizations actually go about attacking random people.
So my computer just started blasting music that I definitely don't have on my computer. It's literally just playing music that's not on my computer.
So when they approached me to make this, they were like, oh, we're going to talk about your research lab and all the stuff you're doing. And this is what they made. It's like the most badass thing that I've done. I was like, all right. Sounds good. So it's just an example. So how can you learn more about this stuff? If you want to learn how to hack and so forth, I have a few resources. One resource is, of course, you could go educate yourself some more, get a Ph.D. So let me plug a little bit here. You can, if you have a mentor, you could learn a whole bunch. And there's a bunch of people who have been asking me, but what does it actually mean? Since you're all students, what does it mean to do a PhD? So in the US, it's a competitive thing. There's hundreds of applications, but it's actually a fully funded, paid position for about 4 to 6 years. It's a time of your life. I've never traveled this much. You never have as little responsibility as when you're a PhD student. So it's a really nice time to kind of ponder and think. And if you even bail out after about a couple of years, you get a free master's degree out of the whole shebang. Their dissertation is going to consist of 3 kind of major papers or contributions that you make. It's a very international department. I think there's like 1 American at Cornell when I was studying. And it gives you a network where you can get jobs for the rest of your life at really interesting places and high salaries. And so in particular, we have a bunch of stuff going on where I'm studying right now, which is not just security stuff. We actually have a whole bunch of interesting questions that we're asking scientifically. Can computers have a conversation? We're changing an Alexa to have a talk, answer questions. Can we extract medical diagnosis from all the kind of crappy stuff that doctors write down on papers? Like, how can you use big data in healthcare to make outcomes better for patients? Can we detect Alzheimer's on a phone or Parkinson's? How does the brain store information? Can you use that to make better storage devices? How do very, very large systems fail? Why do they fail? What happens? Can we predict epidemics by looking at cell phone records just to see when people deviate from their regular movements? Can we detect hackers that are buried inside your network by doing some math? Whole bunch of interesting questions. So if you're interested, I'm happy to talk to you more about that stuff. The other thing that you can do is just to use the internet. It's an amazing resource. And one of the things that we realized is that the amazing resources for learning hacking online are all in the underground. So if you really wanted to do it, you would kind of sink into this kind of into space where they pull you in and be like, yes, yes, now come here and hack. Here's some money from like the Ukrainian mob. Yes, we give you money. You hack something for us? Yes. Right. So what we decided to do was to create this thing I called before, adversary.io, that I just wanted to show you, which is a little platform that just when you log on, you have something like this, and you can just learn the craft. Like, how do you hack? Let's do something. Let's do SQL injection, just something very basic. This particular thing I'm showing you here, it's pretty much the net sum of what the anonymous organization knows how to do. And you can see how much damage they inflict on the world, right? So I'm really hoping this works. Of course it's not going to work, huh? All right. Really? All right. Oh, of course it's not going to work. Normally it does, of course. Do you know the demo effect, right? Whenever you give a demo, there's something that's like a little gnome that comes and destroys it for you when you give it, right? Okay, so here it is. Anyway, I'll maybe show you at the end of the talk if it starts working. Let's go back to here. The other thing I wanted to talk about here was really what you can do. So we talked about why hackers do the things they do from a personal account, how you hack, just a little bit kind of overview, and that mindset and who it is who does it. It's pretty much anybody who's interested in technology. And then the question is like, what can you do about it? And the first thing I wanted you to realize is that you have to give something up if you want security. Security is by definition an inconvenience. Yeah, it's not fun logging onto your phone for two-factor authentication or to swipe an extra key card. It's not fun, but that's the price. Now, there's a corollary to that, which is that if you are in charge of security somewhere, don't make it ridiculously hard to do everything, because then people will work around it, right? If you have a gigantic door that has 16 locks and so forth, people are going to prop it open, right? They're just going to do it. That's what's going to happen if you try to overimpose security. So you have to kind of be aligned with your organization and your people and your employees. But as employees, you have to understand that you have to give something up if you want security, right? The second thing I wanted to talk about, well, first, this is two-factor authentication. By the way, if it's something you take away useful from this talk, it's enable two-factor authentication for all your accounts. Is it perfect? Nope. Is it much better than what you have if you don't have it? Absolutely, right? Passwords are sold left and right. From every website is being compromised, the passwords are sold. You try the same password on multiple sites. It's really easy to compromise things these days, right? So at least have two-factor authentication. The second thing I want to talk about is like, security actually takes active effort. It's not the case that you just like, hey, I just want security right now. Like your boss comes in here, yeah, we need security. How do we get it? Right? So security pops along in the box and you just plug it on and you're done, right? That is absolutely not how it works, right? You don't buy security in a box. It's something that is an active effort. Why? Because you have one of the fastest growing industries, cybercrime. If you can invest in something, invest in cybercrime. It's bigger than Bitcoin, right? In fact, it's the reason why Bitcoin is so big, right? Cybercrime is growing at a rate where you have tons and tons and tons of people, really skilled, really smart people, actively trying to circumvent whatever security measures you come up with, right? So you must keep in that cat and mouse game. You must be ahead of it, right? And it's hard, like I said before. You have to foresee every possible venue of getting inside your system before somebody else does. They only need one way in. Hacking is much easier, right? It takes active effort. And when I say active effort, I mean that if you just plot up here, effort on the x-axis, security on the y-axis, whatever these units might be, let's just be really hyperbolic here. But imagine effort is measured in terms of time or money. Security is some measure of like how hard it is to break in. It looks something like this. Like you invest some effort and it's not so good. Ultimately, you get some sort of critical point, but you will never get to that asymptote. There's always somebody with more resources than you who can break in, right? How are you going to defend yourself against the NSA? Do you have the resources to do so? Do you need to have the resources to do so? What are you trying to protect? What is the risk, right? By the way, Sony, you remember Sony, right? They did that risk analysis. They're like, yeah, what would happen if somebody hacked Sony? What's the worst that could happen, right? Yeah. And then they were even, apparently they got an exemption for passwords so that their passwords could be 4 characters long. And I quote, it's because the artistic types wouldn't possibly be able to remember longer passwords, right? That was Sony. The person responsible for the security was fired. I think he's looking for a job. Anyway, there's an asymptote that you're trying to reach here, right? But then over time, that asymptote changes, right? Because there's more stuff, there's more software, there's more bugs that have been found. So you have to kind of continuously be doing stuff, right? And it's really easy to get nihilistic and be like, well, it's all forfeit. People can just break in anyway. Really? Is that a good strategy? That doesn't do anyone any good. Like, then it just makes it simpler to break inside. What you really want is to maximize the amount of time that somebody has to invest, or effort, or resources, to break into your network, right? Under the budget that you have. And then the fourth thing I want to say is that, well, actually, yeah, assume compromise. Assume that you're already hacked. This is what the big companies are already doing right now. Why? Because they've all been hacked, right? But also because they understand that it's easy to get inside, and they wanted to make it as hard as possible to navigate laterally within the organization. Even if I hack somebody's laptop when they're at home and they take it to work and now have a connection into the workplace, how can I move undetected from that laptop into whatever it is that I want? How can I explore? Can they detect me in the process? That's what they want to know. Like, if you are compromised, also, how can you log enough stuff that you know what was taken, what was changed? Where did they go? What did they burrow themselves into the printer, which is a favorite thing that hackers do? Why? Because nobody checks the printer, right? If you have the logs, you might be able to know this, right? And then finally, you should seek expertise. If you're a company, how do you prove that you have security? How would you prove it? It's something really hard to prove because it's a negative. You're proving that you do not have a weakness. The proof of that is really difficult, right? The way you do it is that you actually get people who know weaknesses. So you get experts, penetration testers or something, ideally different teams, and you get them to try to hack your network and you see how successful they are. That is your only measure, really, of security, is to see how hard it is to break. And if you get different teams, you get different kinds of expertise, and you can train your own team so that you're not blindsided to new attacks as they come about, or things that you just didn't take into account, right? There was, for instance, a company where everything was great, except their Wi-Fi network was just joined in with the guest Wi-Fi network in the store. So we just parked our car outside the store and hacked the network, right? That was that easy, right? Everything else is fine. Really, you need to not be blindsided to new attacks. So one takeaway from the whole thing, the hacker mindset is something that's going to strengthen you in your security resolve. It's going to improve companies that you might run or any organization. It is really what you want to do, is to think how things break. And if you can do that, you know how they get broken and you can fix it before it happens. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions as much time as we have. I don't know how much time we have, but I'll also be in the showcase after the talk if you wanna strike a conversation. Yeah, we have time? Or? Okay, so any questions? Other than acts of God? No? Anyone? Okay, yeah, there's a question. You're about to be mic'd.
Hello.
Hello, hola.
I have a question. What do you think about the Intel kernel bug, the meltdown?
Can you repeat the question again?
The Intel meltdown.
Meltdown and Spectre.
Yes.
Yes. I actually published a video on YouTube about how they work. I don't know if you saw that. But what do you want to know about them? How do they work?
Yes, actually.
Sure. Should I give a really long answer to that question? Oh, I don't have my own laptop. But basically how they work is that there are three things that went wrong, right? Or the three things you need to understand. First, you need to understand how memory works. Memory works that you have something called cache layer in front of memory that is slower. And then the second thing you need to understand is something called speculative execution, which is that your CPU is so fast that it can't wait for memory accesses anymore. And so what it actually does is it's just sprinting there and it's like, okay, I'm just gonna guess. I'm gonna guess what's gonna happen. You have an if sentence. We don't know what the answer is because we have to look up in memory. So I'm just gonna guess that the answer is true. So I'm gonna go and I'm gonna execute it. I'm gonna see what's gonna happen, so forth. So when the slow memory finally finds its way back to the CPU and tells you that it's true, you're already done, right? You're already ahead of the curve, right? Now in the case where it was actually false, then you have to erase everything you did, right? So what happened in Intel, in the design that led to Spectre and Meltdown, was that during this time that you're speculating, you may still be accessing memory. And when you're accessing memory, it gets cached. There's a cached copy of the memory accesses. So the vulnerability is that you're now going to ask some ridiculous question of your computer. You're going to say, hey, if the world is flat, right? And the computer has to go and figure out if that's true. It's going to go really slowly and check the memory. And then inside that branch, you're going to see like, is it true that in this other part of memory I'm not supposed to access that something holds true, right? Is this bit over there set? And in the speculative branch, in the CPU, it has no notion of who owns what. There's no protections or anything. So the speculative branch is just going to go. It's going to say like, yeah, okay, this other application on this machine, it has the bit set, and I'm going to cache a particular page as an evidence of this. And then finally, when your answer comes back and the world isn't actually flat, and the CPU tries to erase everything it did, now you just go and see, was the page corresponding to the bit being 1 or 0, was it set? And now you've read one bit of information from some other process without being killed by the operating system, without being killed by the CPU, and then you just rinse and repeat. And you just keep reading everything that's in memory. So you read the passwords, you read protected information about the random layout of programs. That's how it works, right? That's the fundamental idea behind it. Does that help you?
Yes.
Great. Other questions? Questions? There's a question over here.
Good afternoon.
Yeah.
So imagine that you're not working for a company, you're alone right now, and you're looking for fun. You're after SINFO system because it looks cool.
Okay.
And you go there and try to do something weird. And you find like some huge flaw. But if you report it, they'll ask, what were you doing there in the first place? How do you deal with those kind of situations?
That's an excellent question, right? And this is an ongoing struggle. So there are different mindsets that exist in the world, right? There's the mindset of people who think that if you report a flaw, you yourself must be criminal and you'll be penalized. They shoot the messenger, right? There are lots and lots of people who would take that approach, right? And then there's a new school where people are like, thank you for letting us know, here's some money, right? They give you a bug bounty for doing it, right? So if you're not sure, then legally the best answer that I can give you is walk away from it. Honestly, it's a sad answer, but that's really, for your own protection, the best thing for you to do. The second thing, if you don't want to do that, is to anonymously notify the organization. Say like, I don't know if you're going to come after me or what's happening, but I want you to fix this thing here because somebody else might exploit it, right? And then maybe they'll strike a conversation with your anonymous Gmail account or something like that. That would be the second way in which you could report it. What we do a lot of is to try to educate companies about the value that people who are tinkering with their websites and then reporting vulnerabilities are really providing for them, right? They're providing them with a service for free often. They should actually compensate for that service. So bug bounties are actually on the up and up. In fact, I think even the US government just joined that effort. Now if you hack, if you're a US citizen, if you're in Iran, it doesn't account, like you're not eligible. But if you're a US citizen and you hack something and you report it, like they will actually give you some credit for it, right? So things are changing. If you don't know, stay safe yourself instead of compromising your identity on that. Does that help?
Yeah, but let's imagine a situation where leaving that aside, so running away, will mean that a flaw that affected quite some people. For example, let's have a concrete example. You knew about the Equifax scandal?
Right.
Let's imagine that you knew that up ahead. So if you told Equifax about it, you could get arrested because what were you doing there in the first place?
Right.
But if you didn't like quite a few million people will get their information leaked.
That's
so
right.
you get into an ethical question whether you should protect those persons
Right.
at the cost of your own security,
Yes.
or simply run away and screw them.
Oh, morality. So let me answer your question in two parts. The first is, the official way of reporting these things is to talk to something called CERT, S-C-E-R-T, which is the Computer Emergency Response Team of different countries. What's different between countries is whether or not they will give you protection or not. In some countries, they will not quote their source, but then the company could go and they could check the logs and they could find that you were tinkering and go after you, right? They shouldn't. They're being advised not to, but that is an official mechanism sponsored by the government that says something is amiss, something is wrong, we should get it fixed. There's a group of people who go in there and they'll talk to Equifax and be like, this sucks, dude, take this down, right? They'll say it in a more formal tone than that. The second part of the question is, or like the comment I wanted to make, is generally about morality, right? So what you're talking about is kind of the risk to a greater population. Think about the following example. So something that's happening on the internet is that you have people creating botnets, which is millions of nodes, millions of computers that are unknown to the authors or unknown to the runners, the people who are operating the website, your grandmother. Unknown to these people, their computers are part of this giant swarm of computers. And that swarm of computers is maybe, I don't know, mining bitcoins or attacking some site with a distributed denial of service attack or sending spam. It could be all sorts of things, right? Or they're just waiting for credit card numbers to be entered into the browser and getting a copy of it through a keylogger, right? That's what these botnets are doing. Suppose you are a researcher or you are just a random person who enters a botnet. You see it and you see that it's playing out. You know that it's going to continually harm people. What is your responsibility if you find this? Should you dismantle it? Should you walk away from it? Should you report it? All of these questions are a little bit double-edged. In the case of dismantling it, well, what if you don't understand it fully and it's just going to go back up because you didn't dismantle it properly? Are you allowed to spend a few weeks during which time harm is inflicted to dismantle it? Or to just study it before you take it down? What if you walk away from it? Is that moral? These are dilemmas that actually we face in the security industry all the time. There's also the question that I alluded to during the talk, which is it okay to hack criminals? Is it? Can you be a vigilante? And it's really fun in classes. We have a kind of this philosophical question about this, philosophical discussion about this question. And there are very many different answers. Some people would. Some people definitely wouldn't. Some people are like, well, it depends, right? It's an interesting question, huh? Are you allowed to hack criminals? Who are you to judge? It's like the vigilante question. So there's a lot of interesting moral questions that arise. And I think you're kind of hinting at some of them through what is your civic responsibility if you find a flaw, right? Does that help answer the question at least? Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
More questions? I don't know how we're on time. Are we out of time?
Yeah.
Great, okay.
So if you want to make more questions to Ymir, you can do it on the showcase. And now let's give him a round of applause for his magnificent talk.
Thank you.